So the Cuernavaca mission covers the state of Morelos and the state of Guerrero. Before, when I served, there was a tiny part of Michoacan, but that part got moved to a different mission because it was so far away from the mission offices. But now, like, everything's within a few hours. There are lots of stakes. To be precise, I think there were 14 zones. That may not be true. I don't entirely remember. I think that's how many there were, or 10. It was like 10 to 14. There may be more now. Like, I know that they've added an area in like the eastern part of the coast. There are lots of stakes up, and like a lot of areas or a lot of zones will have more than one stake, especially in Morelos, where like early on the missionary work just like kicked off. And so there are a lot of members up in Morelos. And like Guerrero, it's a little more spread out. It's also a big state. Morelos is like really compact, just like a lot of like cities and small areas in a small state. So in the Cuernavaca mission, it's really common for a little less than 50% attendance, maybe less. There was a lot of work to do with less active members. So yeah, we actually did that a lot because like early on in my mission, we were like okay with knocking doors and stuff. And then my mission president said, no, you know, it would be better if we work with the less active members, and like got referrals from them, you know, and that actually like increased the spirituality of my mission. We were able to help people and not focus so much like on just like getting good numbers, but also helping people spiritually. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do with the less active members because there have been a lot of baptisms and not a whole ton of focus on retention. And that's kind of where the focus is going to now, at least like towards the end of my mission, and I'm sure like it's still continuing, is, you know, getting people baptized, but like making sure they understand so that they, you know, so that there's retention, so they stay after. Because, you know, there are a lot of religious sects down in Mexico, the primary one being the Catholic Church. You know, that it's huge down there. They like to worship La Virgen Guadalupe, which is like Virgin Mary, but tan. I don't know the entire story. Didn't particularly worry myself with that. But a lot of them will say like, oh yeah, I'm Catholic, you know, in quotation marks, which means they like don't go to church, but you know, they still like affiliate themselves with the Catholic Church. And so a lot of times if we don't, you know, like help them out to understand the gospel entirely before they get baptized, that same attitude goes towards the Mormon Church, where they get baptized and then they say like, yeah, I'm Mormon. Like they'll stop going to church because it's kind of this attitude of like, let them be. There are other religious groups. They're Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of them, and especially in one of my areas. And a lot of times the missionaries will get distracted from the message that they're trying to teach and like start fighting with these other groups. It's really easy to do, to get really angry, because they'll try and fight with you. They'll try to like tell you you're wrong, pull out scriptures on you, and you know, the only thing you can really do at that point is testify. You can share with them, like if they have honest questions, you can share with them the answer. But a lot of times in those situations, they don't actually want an answer. They just want you to kind of get angry. They want that spirit of contention. And the spirit of contention isn't of the Lord. And so obviously, like, missionaries shouldn't have that spirit of contention. Because in like Latin America, you tend to baptize more than in like Europe and stuff. There's also a focus on like, you know, getting a lot of baptisms. And when like the baptisms go down, people flip out. Zone leaders will start chewing you out because you're not getting as many baptisms as maybe the missionaries before. Like, you might not be getting as many baptisms as you were before. And it's really easy to get all caught up in the politics and in the numbers game. But something that my mission president taught me more towards the end of my mission that I wish I would have applied more during my mission was to focus on loving the people, and then the numbers will come. That's what he would say. I don't particularly mean like, oh, if you just love people, you'll get 1 million baptisms, but that's what matters, is that you're serving people and that you're honestly concerned with their well-being. That's a huge problem dealing with the retention, is that a lot of missionaries were more concerned with getting a baptism than with helping somebody progress in the gospel. And so before they were ready, before they understood completely, they were just getting them baptized and then kind of leaving them on the wayside. So I just feel like it's really important to have the Spirit with you in lessons and not just teach things to check them off a list. You don't want to just say in order to be baptized, they need to hear me say this. But really help them to understand and to get their own testimony. That's why, the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith, that's why that part is all so vital, that they receive that testimony, because when they receive that, then, it'll start to make sense to them that they need to get baptized. Another huge issue in Mexico, and I'm sure this is a huge issue all over the world, but this is the biggest issue that we would see, is that a lot of times in situations where a man and a woman would come together, they would either not be married, or the man would come and have some children with the woman and then leave. And so there were a lot of single mothers down in Mexico, and that was difficult because there's the rule that missionaries shouldn't be alone with women. The male missionaries, elders, shouldn't be alone with women. They should have a man present. That caused a lot of issues because the women down in Mexico tend to be more spiritually inclined. They're more humble and more ready to accept the gospel. And so what a lot of missionaries would do is they just leave that rule off to the side. Say what, we're just gonna go in there anyway. And around my time, our mission president really choked up on that and said hey, there needs to be a member present in the lessons. You need to have a man there. And also focus on finding complete families. And, as I said, a lot of times they wouldn't be married, which made it difficult if you did find a family, because then you had to go through the process of getting them married, which wasn't cheap and also wasn't fun for them, because then they had to get all of their birth certificates and stuff together. It was always a hassle with the law of chastity. But really, the Lord's elect, those who are ready to accept the gospel, will put forth that effort. And so a lot of times it's really hard to do when you find somebody who's really open to the gospel but are not willing to make that change. It's really hard to drop that investigator, but sometimes it's what you need to do, because sometimes they need a little more time for the Lord to prepare them before the missionaries come in and finish up the lessons, get them baptized, and let them enter the fold. I feel there was always this misconception that the members didn't understand the gospel, and maybe they didn't. Maybe there were things that just didn't make sense to them. But what I noticed in the really strong members is that they honestly loved people. They loved the gospel. There were some members who would get angry over certain things, but you know, what they need is more spiritual help. That doesn't mean that they're like lost or that they're a problem. And those members that do love, like, you can just feel their love. In Mexico, like, it's very common as a missionary to have people just offer you food. And a lot of times, to be polite, you have to take it because they will get offended if you don't take their food. That happened a lot. But the members down there are, like, even if they don't, you know, understand completely what the gospel is and why they need to do certain things, they're trying, and they love it, and they love the Lord, and they're gonna love you, you know, even if you're like on the bottom of their list of favorite missionaries, they're gonna love you. And remember that, because love is what's most important about all of this. I'm talking to whoever might be watching. And then the areas that I served in, I started in Acapulco Centro, which is center. And then I was transferred over, and Acapulco's down in Guerrero. And I was transferred up to Morelos in, the area was called Zapata. The city is called Cuautla. That was actually the zone too. After that, I was transferred to a small town in Morelos called Tehuixtla, and was there for a little while. And then I got transferred to what's called La Mira, which is in Michoacan. It isn't in the mission anymore. But it was 13 hours away from the mission offices, so it makes sense that they, you know, moved that over to a different mission. Plus, it took them a few days to, like, take a temple trip, so now they can go. I can't remember which temple it is. I think it's Guadalajara. I don't know. Not sure. And then after that, I got transferred over to Morelos again in a little town called Tepoztlan. And after that, I was sent back to Acapulco in an area called Cumbres in the zone Costa Azul. There were a few Aztec temples, quite a few. Actually, there was one in one of my areas in Tepoztlan. They call it a Pueblo Mágico because or like a magic town, because they've, like, kind of conserved the basic feel of it when the conquistadors came in. And so, like, the streets look kind of European, and up on the hill there's actually El Tepozteco, which is it's a small little temple, but they've got that, and that was in my area. And there were also lots of different little pieces of architecture that nobody had really bothered to, like, uncover, but we found doing service projects, carrying things up the hill that we had to do. It's a long story, but we found, like, little spots of just where there used to be buildings built by those who were there before. Also, there's actually a city of these temples and buildings, and on one of the temples that they have, the like Aztec temples, there's an engraving of what's called the feathered serpent. I can't remember the name for it. It's been so long. I think it was Quetzalcoatl, and they talk about a white man who showed up. They treated him as a god, and, like, he came. And I don't know the whole story, but they call him the feathered serpent, and that he left and said he was going to come back. And that's like the local lore, that's why when the conquistadors came in, they were like, "Oh, you're back. It's the white men of tale," you know? But it was kind of well understood in our mission that was kind of the legend passed down through the generations of when Christ visited the Americas. I'm sure, you know, out of all of the Lamanite tribes, they passed down stories, and I'm sure they also had maybe even some of their own records. We don't know everything about the Native Americans and exactly like what happened to the Lamanites after the end of the Book of Mormon, and like how they split up and how they divided themselves and like what they chose to, or how they chose to live after that. But it's just really interesting to see those kinds of things, to see just like something like that and say like, yeah, I know that this happened. Whereas like somebody who's not Mormon and hears the tale of the feathered serpent, they're like, man, these people are weird, you know? Like they had some kind of story of a white man, you know? Like, I don't know. It was just really interesting to go to that site and to see it.